Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for another episode of Addicted to Gear. Today I thought I'd take you along for a little adjustment that I normally do on my guitars. I figured it'd be a good opportunity to show you the steps that I take whenever I bring a new guitar into the studio, what I like to do when I adjust it for the first time. So if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that I recently acquired this beautiful Harley Benton Fusion 2 guitar, and overall quite impressed by its features, its playability. The hardware on this guitar is really top notch. Highly recommended if you're looking for an alternative to the more expensive guitars out there. Now, obviously, whenever you bring in a new guitar straight out of the box, it's not always set up 100%. This guitar is actually set up pretty nicely, but there are a couple of little things that I wanted to tweak. So I figured we'd discuss those, and I'd walk you through my normal setup. So what I normally do whenever I bring in a guitar, I do a once over, and in this guitar I noticed that there's a couple of little things, nothing major, thankfully. So the height on the strings seems to require a little bit more relief in the neck, so I'm going to adjust that. I'm also going to adjust the bridge saddle. For some reason the low E string side of the bridge seems to be a little bit lower than the high E string, which normally would be the other way around. The high E string on the fretboard is a little bit low, so I'm gonna adjust that after I adjust the curvature of the neck. And then there's the question of this pot, and if you can hear that, there's something wrong with it. I think it's either that the pot has been compressed when it was in the box. It just makes a noise. It's not smooth like the other one. So I'm going to take a look at that pot. I'll open up the back if I have to, and we'll see what we can do to get that to turn without making any noise. So minor things, but I figured it would be nice to show you the steps involved. So what I normally do is I always put a capo on the first fret before I take the measurements of the strings. So because I'm somewhat of a heavy hitter when I strum the strings, I like to leave a 0.12 millimeter gap, or 0.30 millimeter if you're looking at these thickness gauges. So what I do is I normally put the capo on the first fret, hold the string down so that it's straight and it's acting like a straight edge, and then I slide it underneath the 7th fret, and I see if the gauge actually lifts up the string, right? And if it does, as in this case it does, then I need to adjust the height. And there's two ways we can do the height adjustment, and it's pretty much the same thing for the high E string. So before I mess with the bridge in any way, I like to make sure the neck has enough relief. And so what I do is I just sight down the neck. And this neck has very little relief in it. So what I'll do to start off is I'll give it a quarter turn just to give it a little bit more relief there. What we'll do is we'll take the tool that came with the guitar, and that's this sort of like bar looking device here. You can see that in the bag. I'll try and take it out. Just this simple bar that goes into the holes that are provided here for the bridge saddle, and we can basically just turn it. So either you need to tighten it or loosen it. So we want to make sure that we're going in the right direction, and what I normally check to start off is that the truss rod does move. nicely on its own. So I'll just give it a little quarter turn. Normally a quarter turn is enough to do the job. And then I'll remeasure on the 7th fret. I like to leave it a little longer to actually take the effect of the compression out of the wood, but sometimes you can already tell immediately if you've given it enough relief. And if not, I'll just repeat the process. You want to loosen it. If you loosen it, you should have a little bit more relief in the neck. If you tighten it, then the relief will go away. So you want to make sure you're turning it in the right direction. So it's still a little low for my liking. So I'm going to just give it a little bit more of a turn. The wheel is very convenient when it comes to adjusting the relief on the neck. It's getting there. Just going to sight down the neck one more time. Yeah, so I can see a little bit more relief. There's actually a little bit more relief on the low E side compared to the high E side of the guitar. Sometimes you'll get that. Okay, it seems to be good. And what I like to do at this point is just tune it up to make sure I don't get any buzzing in the guitar. And I'll do that just by using this very cheap headstock tuner that I have here. I don't even know if the battery's charged on it, but let's have a look here. All right. Battery hasn't given out on me yet, which is great. And then I just pick along the neck to see if I can hear any buzzing. And what I noticed about this guitar is that the frets on the guitar, since they're stainless steel, have been finished quite nicely. They're polished beautifully. They don't have any rough edges along the edge of the neck at all. There's no fret sprout, which is fantastic. So I'm pretty happy. And I think what they're probably doing is they're probably putting a little bit more attention into the setup of the guitar, especially the frets, because stainless steel frets are harder, so they're harder to work with, and they need to be finished properly. And really, the side of the frets on these things are really outstanding. And I'm really impressed that they also have decided to go with a tusk nut on these guitars, because usually they skimp out on the nut. In this case, they have not. While I'm here, I think I'm going to just measure the relief. Curious to see what the relief is on the fretboard. I want to make sure that looks like it's about 14 on the high registry of the neck here. Let's see if it's the same here. Yeah, it looks to be 14. Let's try 12 just to see the difference. I haven't taken out the plastic cover. It's hard to tell. Actually, I think it's closer to 12-inch radius is what it looks like. So let me just check it on this side. 12-inch radius is a nice radius to work with on a guitar. Yep, looks like it's 12. Great. 12 is a nice radius. I like 12. And I like to check that the bridge has also been set up to follow the radius. And in this case, I can see that the G and the B string are actually a little bit too low. So I might raise that up a little bit. Just raise these two strings up a little bit so that they actually follow the contour of the neck nicer. And I haven't actually used this type of a bridge, so I'm not really sure if I have to loosen up. There's a couple of different adjustments on this bridge. You have one adjustment screw at the end here. You have another adjustment screw here. And then you have the two height adjustment screws there. So I guess it's kind of interesting the way it works. I haven't actually seen this before, so I'll have to play around with that a little bit and see what we can do. So let's start off by adjusting the height of those two strings there. And I think I have, now if I try to adjust without, if I try to adjust it, I can lower it, but I can't make it go higher unless I loosen up this guy first. So we'll do that. Then we'll give it a little bit more relief. Just 2 turns should be enough. And then we'll lock it down. I'll do the same for the B string here. And if you make it follow the contour of the neck like that, it just feels better, in my opinion. So I just take the same gauge and I put it up against the strings, and then I just verify that the strings are indeed touching all the way across the radius, and it just makes it nicer to play. So it seems okay. At this point, I'm going to assume that the intonation on the bridge is good at this point. I haven't checked it completely yet, but I'll leave it as is. Now I'll retighten these screws down so that everything stays in place as it should. And then I'm gonna raise up the E side, the high E side here, just a smidge. Just by loosening up. And you don't have to go crazy with this. It's just like a minor turn is all you need. So if we look at the Wilkinson bridge on this guitar, it's pretty cool because every individual saddle has 3 adjustments. You have the forward and back adjustment screw, which is at the back of this tab here. You have the lockdown screw, which is the one on the top here, and that basically keeps all of the tabs or individual saddles in place when you intonate the guitar. And then you have the two height adjustment screws here, and those it's nice to see that those are all countersunk so that they don't scratch your palm. And because it's using a 2-post system here, you can see that there's no 6 screws like on the classic Fender guitars. There's just 2 posts, one here and one there. And what's good about this type of setup is that the knife edge that you have there helps return the bridge to the proper position when you dive bomb it, and it avoids getting it snagged. There's less friction points than a 6 saddle bridge would normally have. Here you can see the pickups, and here you can see the type of adjustment that they have for the truss rod. So it's in the bottom end of the neck and not the top, which is very convenient for adjustment purposes. You can see that the fret ends on the guitar are really nicely rounded over. I don't know if you can see that here. You can see that they're polished nicely and they're crowned nicely, and for stainless steel frets, that's super important. The other thing I want to bring your attention to is how tight the neck pocket and neck fit together. There's absolutely no space whatsoever between the two. It's really snug. You can see all the way up and down the neck. I'm getting so close that you're getting some shadow in there, but can you see that? I've rarely seen a neck that's that tight. We're going to take a look at the nut, because it is an actual tusk nut that they're using here. It's not plastic. I like tusk nuts a lot because they're very slick and they will allow the string to slide nicely when you're using your the treble bar. And I also like the way the slots are cut here. The height of the string at this point is pretty critical to me, and you can see that they do give enough clearance. You can actually lower it more depending on what you like, but for me that is pretty nice action for the way I like to play the guitars. And as I mentioned in my other video, the neck seems really nice in terms of the wood grain. Can you see this? It does have a variation between one side and the other. You can see that the grain is lighter here, and then it has little dark patches, if you can call them that, or veins. But I like it. It really makes the neck seem rich. You can see it all the way down the neck. Pretty happy with the way that looks. It doesn't look dry at all. It doesn't look like it needs any type of oiling. The markers are inlaid very nicely, pretty precisely. And even the stock strings that come on the guitar are to my liking. I don't know what they're using as stock strings, but they don't seem like cheap strings to me. So what I'll do next is remove the tremolo bar, and we'll flip over the guitar and we'll open up and see what we can do with this. So the volume knob is the knob that's causing the issues here. And typically it's not the knob, it's the actual pot. As you can see, it's still making noise here. So I may have to replace the pot, but before I do that, I'm going to spray it with some. Component cleaner, and we'll see if we can get it to cooperate. So we'll remove the back plate here. This is the only weird thing that I find on this guitar, is that it's such an elegant guitar, but the back plate sits on top of the body instead of being nicely countersunk like they do on some other types of guitars. And that makes it look a little bit cheap, in my opinion. They could have maybe spent a little bit more time on that. Maybe on the other ones that they're going to be releasing, maybe the newer models will, maybe they'll make that change. We'll see. So for those of you that are curious, you'll see that they're using this bridge is using a pretty thick block. Sometimes you see thicker blocks, and oftentimes you'll see thinner blocks there. In this particular case, it's kind of in between. Quite nice, actually. And the inside of the back cavity seems to be pretty clean, and there's not, like on some guitars you'll see a whole bunch of like polishing paste and whatnot still left over. Not in this case. Pretty clean, so I like that. Let's pop off the cover here on the control side and see what we can see in here. Well, this is interesting. So we can see here that they're actually using full-size pots. I was expecting to see mini pots, because often you get mini pots in these guitars. But in this case, they're using full-size pots, which is nice. It's a 500K there. And here it's actually an alpha pot. So an alpha pot they're good quality pots. That's what I usually use. Soldering seems very nicely done. The wiring seems very nicely done as well. I don't see any cold solder joints in there. I can see that they nicely wrapped up everything. So what I'll do is I'll spray some pot cleaner in there, and we'll see if that maybe loosens the scratchiness of the pot at all. That's the first step I take, because otherwise we'll have to replace the pot eventually. It doesn't sound scratchy when I play it though. So I'm being careful to spray the cleaner as much as possible inside the pot. Sometimes what happens is that the pot gets compressed, but in this particular case I just think it's pot itself that I'm going to spray a little bit more in there, try and get some in. You don't need a whole bunch, just a bit, and then rotate the pot, and you can see it immediately feels less stiff, but it's still making the noise. So it may need to be replaced eventually. I don't want to replace it now because it's not scratchy or anything, so it's just a minor noise issue, but we'll leave it as is. But when that pot does start getting scratchy, it's going to come out. I'm going to also spray some contact cleaner in the other side. It's brand new, so you don't usually have to do this, but I do it anyways because a little bit of preventative spray in there when it's open will sometimes save you some issues later on. And like I said, just a little bit. Work the pot. Even in newer pots, when they're straight out of the factory, they can sometimes get oxidized because the pots lay around for a while. Sometimes in batches before they're actually inserted into the guitar, and then with the guitar getting shipped out, sometimes they're exposed to different temperatures and whatnot. So sometimes you will get issues there down the line. But I usually like to wait and then change the pots. Unless, of course, they're really inferior pots. Mini pots are often, on the guitars coming from China, are really cheap. And sometimes I change them just because the tolerances are off by quite a bit. And you can definitely get some noticeable improvement in tone by changing out those cheap pots right off the bat. So I didn't even take the plastic off the back plate yet. Keep it on because it protects it. I'll remove it later on. When you're screwing back the back plates on your guitar, don't overdo it. It's nice also to see that the inside of the cavity where the controls are has been treated with noise shield paint, and you have a shield on the back of the cover as well, so that's nice. That should help with any kind of noise interference. And apart from that, I'll give you a look at some of the details on the guitar. The fret edges and the nut, because I know a lot of people are curious about that. I often like to also check for any loose nuts on the input jack, but there's none here. And I also like to check the height of the pickups, and I like to leave about on my pickups on most of my guitars. I usually leave about let's get the right side here, the millimeter side. If you do quarters of an inch, if you do inches, usually about an eighth is good. In this case, it's a little bit high. So I'll adjust the height a little bit. I like to have the treble side slightly higher, but in this case it's quite a bit higher. So I'm just gonna lower it smidge on the high E side. I think I'm also going to lower it a little bit on the low E side as well. Yep, that's better. Yep, we're good there. Good overall. So I'm gonna just take off these little plastic tabs now. The Roswell pickups on this guitar play very nicely. I was expecting to have issues like I saw on previous models, but this particular version of this guitar, I believe they upgraded the pickups on it, because they really don't sound as muddy as the other ones that I've tried did sound. The individual magnet screws here are not set up properly. They're you can see that some of them are further in, some of them are further out, and I like to fix those so that they're consistent. And what I normally do is just find my screwdriver and adjust them accordingly so that they're all pretty much at the right height. These seem to be a little bit too high overall, so I'll just flatten them up a little bit by giving them 2 turns each. I can tell right off the bat that the pickups are potted, wax potted, because they when pickups are wax potted and you turn the screws like this, they're usually pretty hard to turn, and you can see the wax in the pickup screw basically come out, and that's what's happening here. They're hard to turn. I'm just trying to be careful so I don't slip and scratch the pickup cover. I should have actually removed the plastic later, but the plastic actually covers the top, so I'm using both my hands because it's pretty hard to turn. And I'll do this for all of them. If you really suffer from OCD, then you're gonna definitely want to make all of the screws face in the same direction. I sometimes suffer from OCD. All right, that's that. So you can see the little wax bits that have come off, and now I have to kind of clean the smudge of the wax off of the pickups. There goes the nice shiny pickups, but hey, it's only rock and roll, guys. I'll clean those up afterwards with some with better quality cleaning device than just a regular paper towel. All right, that's good for the time being, and that's pretty much it. That's all this guitar really needs. So I'll plug it in again. I'll put the pickups through their paces. and call it a night. And that's really all we need to do. I'll just give the arm a little turn here so that we can, I don't want it to be too stiff, but I don't want it to come out. So I'll just leave it. Yeah, I like the arm to be able to spin a little bit. All right. So that's pretty much how I do some of the setup. Some guitars require a little bit more setup than others, but this guitar overall is quite nice and doesn't require as much attention. Eventually what I'll do is when the neck, when the fretboard becomes dry, I'll oil it and clean it, polish up the frets, but because the frets are stainless, as I mentioned, it doesn't need as much attention. And that's pretty much it. It's a great guitar so far, and I hope you guys liked what I'm showing you. This has been the Addicted to Gear My Messy Workbench edition for everybody out there that's interested in working on your own guitars. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned. There'll be more stuff coming your way.